What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy, back with Hometown Commander. We're back for another episode of On Deck. This is my series where I go over the decks that I'm currently testing and that are almost ready to be built. And doing my videos this week, brewing Marnius Calgar, which you can, if you go over to the channel, you can see I did my brew video for it, built that deck up. The deck tech is also on the channel. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you want to see more decks. But building Calgar this week, it really got me thinking about how much I truly love this deck. This is, as a brewer, I build a lot. I brew a lot, and it's something I truly enjoy. But it's very few and far between that you find decks that just truly that you're always excited to play. I've had a few in my time. Gorkla, of course, is the deck I hope to be known for. It's a deck that I truly love, and you can see that deck tech over on the channel. And I think I've accomplished a few more of my time, but I think this is the deck that I hope at some point it gets there. The idea for this deck started a few years ago with a commander called Kaikar in Jeskai, trying to do a very similar thing, enchantments and artifacts, going wide with tokens and having fun in combat. And I realized, I think over time, that Kaikar does a lot better as a Spellslinger commander than it does as a tokens commander, and I shifted my focus with Kaikar over to spells. But Alela was a commander that always interested me because this was the first Esper deck I truly ever built, the first Esper deck that I ever played around with. And I realized very quickly that it had all of the white things that I wanted to do with the tokens deck. But I got to take out the blue spellslingy spells for a lot of great blue pieces of control and extra value. And I got to sub out all of the red damage spells and the big mana red spells, and put in black enchantments and spells that just push your strategy forward and really take the high risk, high reward that black is and spin it in a favor that I really enjoy. This deck is a ton of fun to play. The list you see before you is the most recent iteration of this list, adding some of the cards in from 40k. So what I'm really going to do is I'm just going to quickly walk through the deck, talk about the cards I've seen do well, the cards I've seen really shape the deck around them. You know, I've probably gone through at least a dozen or a dozen and a half iterations of this deck, changing cards, trying new strategies, because I truly think that's what makes a deck good, is when you take the time to understand it and push it forward by trying and trying. And so the first real set of cards that I realized very quickly made this deck really good were the artifacts. I know that's going to sound kind of odd because you're going to say, Millzy, Alela says whenever you cast an artifact or an enchantment spell, you get a 1/1. Why would playing artifacts be something that was a lesson you need to learn? Well, that's because this came from a Kaikar deck that was very enchantment heavy. I love playing Enchantress. It's a really fun strategy. I've cut my teeth with Sithis and 5-color shrines and those kind of decks, and they're a ton of fun. And I think I tried to force Alela through a Enchantress box when I didn't realize that blue and black have so many great artifact strategies, and I was missing all of them. All of our mana rocks with Alela out get us a 1/1. All of our mana rocks that we need anyway, we need to push our strategy forward, just get better. And that means we can use things like Nettle Cyst, which buffs a creature for the number of artifacts and enchantments we control. And something like Michiko's Reign of Truth, which does the same thing, because become even better because we're not just playing artifacts, we're playing enchantments as well. We're playing both, and we're really going hard into both. I think another big step that Alela took in artifacts was Phyrexian Altar. I realized that Phyrexian Altar pushes your turns forward. You give up those 1 or 2 1/1s that came in this turn that you can't attack with to get another enchantment down to either buff the squad or get some more value down so that you can push the game forward and do even more, and not being afraid to take all 5 of the tokens that you have and dump them into a Sigil of the Empty Throne, or a Smothering Tithe, or a Shark Typhoon, or these giant enchantments that literally just go ahead and push your strategy even further forward. Not being afraid to say, I can set up for next turn, because these enchantments are a lot harder to remove than my creatures are, right? And kind of pushing that strategy forward. Another of the big ones for me was realizing that Time Sieve is a lot easier in this deck to make work than I thought it was going to. I'm playing Thopter Assembly, and Thopter Assembly is a really fun card, and it pairs really well with Time Sieve. But the other card that I just saw recently that I think makes that strategy really fun is Biotransference, a new card from 40k, which makes all of your creatures artifacts, which means all of these 1/1s we're creating, we can sack to Time Sieve, take extra turns. We also have a card like Wand of Orcus, which has been in this deck for so long, and every time I see it, it does so much good. Whenever it attacks or blocks, it and zombies you control gain Death Touch. Well, Alela already has Death Touch, so that's not really that big of a deal. But it says whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, create that many 2/2 zombies. Well, Alela is going to get buffed by things. Is going to get buffed by things like Michiko's most of the time. Or Nettlecyst is a really fun target for Alela, since we can kind of get some of that commander damage type wins as well. Well, now we're creating zombies that with Biotransference can be artifacts for Time Sieve, or they can sacrifice for mana for Phyrexian Altar, or they can go even wider the rest of our board and just make these big giant attacks. It's not just about making those fairy tokens. This is a little extra piece of honestly kind of goodness we get to have. Another artifact that I learned really quickly was very good was Throne of the God Pharaoh, and this made its way into my Jetmir list as well, which is Naya tokens is just very much more of a go wide on the ground deck, whereas Alela is more of a go wide in the air deck. Throne of the God Pharaoh says at the beginning of the end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. If we swing out with our whole board of 10 or 11 creatures, we're doming everybody for 11. And that just pushes the game forward. It gets better as the game goes on. Now, I do have some enchantments that give my creatures vigilance, and that's kind of a non-bow, unfortunately. But more often than not, I see them at separate times. And so it never ends up actually like really mattering. Most of the time, we end up seeing them kind of mutually exclusively, and so we don't have to worry about that. I think my next big lesson I learned with Alela was that I could play creatures in the deck. Alela only pays off artifacts and enchantments, and so I think it's easy just to say, okay, well, that's it. Artifacts, enchantments, land, spells, that's it. That's all we're playing. But the problem is, when Alela leaves the battlefield, when we no longer have her down and gaining value off her, we have to set up token engines around her to still allow us to have tokens to win the game with. Because although she buffs our tokens and she makes tokens right when we play our spells, we still need something to end the game with. We need something to kind of be that bubble net around the rest of our tokens to kind of help us win the game, right? Alela does a very good job at that by pumping them all up and getting us more and more every turn. But we need creatures and enchantments that are going to help us kind of put the bubble around us if we can't A, get Alela down, or B, she gets removed and we can't put her back down. The first is Monastery Mentor. This is a card that started its time in Kaikar and very quickly came over here. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, 1/1 monk with prowess. So we're doing a similar thing whenever we cast a non-creature spell. So cool part here is we get sorceries, instants, and the couple planeswalkers we have. We get 1/1 monks. Again, making those tokens, going wide. We have Esper Sentinel. Drawing cards is great. As Mikey would say, drawing cards in a card game is very good, especially in this deck. We need to get into all of our good enchantments. We need to get into all of our pieces that make our board even, and our artifacts that make our board better. And Esper Sentinel is just one way to do it. The cool part about Esper Sentinel is Alela does not say non-creature. So if Alela's already down and we have an Esper Sentinel, for 1 mana, we can make another 1/1. And then 2 of the newer ads and have worked really well for me so far. Zur Eternal Schemer from Dominaria United, one of our most recent sets. Enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. And for 2 mana, we can make our enchantments into creatures. This has been really interesting because, I have not played a card called Starfield of Nyx. It's an enchantment that says when you have enough enchantments, all your enchantments turn into creatures where their power and toughness equal to their mana value, and it's a good card in a box. But when you put it down on the battlefield, you open up your board to just get wrapped into oblivion. What I like about Zur is we can pick the right enchantments to become creatures. We can pick the Black Market Connections, or the Shark Typhoons, or a little bit Kindred Discoveries, a little bit bigger up on the scale that we're okay with losing if we have to, but still are going to give us a ton of firepower in the short term. And then a card that is very, very, very recently got into the deck, but I've already seen it used once or twice to really cool effect, is Fairy Artisans. The only fairy I'm running in the deck, other than Alela, says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types, then exile all the tokens created with Fairy Artisans. The interesting thing about this is that we can copy our opponent's best creatures, and the cool part here is if we know that there's a creature coming in, let's say that's really good, and we want to use it, and we want to get rid of the rest of them, well, we can sack them to a Phyrexian Altar or something else to get rid of the rest of them, so we don't have to exile them when it comes down, and get that copy and kind of get it moving. It just adds extra creatures, extra tokens, extra bodies on the field for us that deal good damage. Let's talk about these two planeswalkers really quick, and then we'll move into the enchantments, which is where a bulk of this deck is. Tezzeret, Artifice Master, has been in this deck for a really long time for two reasons. One, it's +1. It gives us a flying token. That's exactly what we want to do. But 0 says draw a card. If you control 3 more artifacts, draw 2 cards. I've drawn so many cards with Tezzeret when I've needed to, and it's always done me a good job. And then if you get to the -9, you could just go get a permanent card and put it on the battlefield. And believe me, there's a lot of permanents in this deck that we want to play and we want to get out. But the other planeswalker, which made its way in a lot later, which seems kind of odd because it's a strictly better planeswalker, and that's 3 mana Teferi. Teferi Time Raveler from More of the Spark. And the big reason this came in was to stop people interacting on our turn when we're ready to swing out. We're ready to get that thing going. We're ready to make our attacks. Not only that, we can turn our sorceries on at instant speed. Doesn't happen very often. There's not many sorceries that we'd want to play on in our opponent's turns, except maybe the pair of board wipes or a couple board wipes that are in the deck. But we do have that bounce ability as well, to bounce something back, draw a card. But it's mainly in there for that. Top ability, although we don't draw off Alela, we do get some other benefit for it. But like I said, the enchantments are where this deck really shines, and I want to break the enchantments down into really 3 categories. The first is just a little bit of stopping our opponents, not stacks, not true shutdown stacks, but just stopping our opponents and getting value off our opponents. Ashes of the Abhorrent, whenever a creature dies, we gain a life. Players can't cast spells or activate abilities from graveyards, so that shuts down the graveyard decks. Authority of the Consuls, all of our creatures our opponent control come in tapped, we gain a life. Blind Obedience, artifacts and creatures our opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. That's really great. And then the absolute Mac Daddy of these cards, and I can't believe this card wasn't in here, because this was an all-star in Sithis, and I loved this card in Sithis, and then it took me until the last time I looked at this deck, and I said, why is Confinement not in this deck? Beginning of your upkeep, sack Solitary Confinement unless you discard a card. Skip your draw step. You have Shroud. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. Doesn't stop any life loss, because life loss and damage are different things, but it's going to stop you from pretty much getting attacked. And this card is bonkers when played at the right time. In this deck, because we don't have as many cantrips as most Enchantress decks, although we do have a ton of ability to draw cards. Believe me, there's no lack of drawing cards on this deck. In Sithis, this is something that, as an afterthought, you pitch a card at the start of your turn, you draw 10 more in your turn, you're not worried about it. But in this deck, I think it protects you when you swing all out and start making the big money moves, when you start ending the game. The second is what I'm going to call the cards that buff our team, the cards that are going to push us through for the win. All That Glitters, we pick a creature, it gets +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment. We have this, we have Michiko's, and we have Nettlecyst, all doing this very similar effect. Most of the time, these are going on Alela. We want to do that big damage. We want to push that big damage forward. Actions of the Chosen. Most of the time, this comes down calling fairies, right? Because Alela's making fairies, and most of our creature tokens are going to be fairies. Gives them a +1/+1. And then the cool part is, for 1 and sacking one of our fairy tokens, we can give Alela indestructible, which is cool. It does work from time to time. If we need to block Alela, block a big creature, something like that, since it says Death Touch. Believe me, there's been plenty of scenarios where I've used that. Favorable Winds. All creatures I control with flying get +1/+1. Almost every single token I'm looking to make in this deck has flying, besides those 2/2 zombies. So this just puffs our entire board. Inspiring Leader. Hey, backgrounds are useful outside of the command zone, people. Commander creatures you control have creature tokens you control get +2/+2. This card has ended a few games. When you have 10 or 12 1/1 or 2/1s with the Alela out in the air and you put out Inspiring Leader, think about that. You've now almost tripled the amount of damage you're going to do, in that scenario. And so it just helps a lot. Intangible Virtue. Creature tokens you control get +1/+1 at Vigilance. Now we can attack for free. We have absolutely no worry about attacking and getting hit on the return. Paladin class on its stage 2, we get all our creatures get +1/+1, and on that stage 3, it pretty much just starts hurting people, especially when we can use it on Alela. And the last card is Reconnaissance for 1 white. We can pay 0, and right at that last step of the end step, at the battle step, when we have that last round of priority, we use Reconnaissance, effectively give all of our creatures Vigilance, and have them all untapped for the next time around. And the last kind of thing for the enchantments are just what I'm calling good enchantments. Smothering Tithe. Get us the mana when we need it. Rhystic Study. Draw some cards throughout the process of the game. Oubliette. Phase out someone's commander if you need to, or it's a great piece of removal. Mirror Maid. Can copy any non-legendary enchantment we control, of course. We don't want to copy any artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. We want to preferably pick one that's non-legendary if it's ours that we're copying, but if it's an opponent's, then we don't care. But Mirror Maid comes in, copies anything. Luminarch Ascension. If we can go 4 turns without losing life on our opponent's turns, it's 2 mana for a 4/4 angel, and it just takes over games. Kindred Discovery draws us cards. Anytime, most of the time we choose fairies whenever a fairy comes in or attacks, and that's going to refill our hand near constantly. Imprisoned in the Moon. Get rid of your opponent's commander, make it a land. Darksteel Mutation. You notice a lot of my removal here is on enchantments because we get fairies for it. And enchantments are just harder to take care of. They're harder to get rid of. And that's why I love it. Black Market Connections. I didn't know how good this card was going to be the first time I saw it, and then I played with it, and this card's crazy. Especially that first ability. I will happily take a treasure for 1 life because most of the time it's just going to completely push you through for more and more damage. One of my favorite enchantments, it's been in this deck since I first created it, Bitter Blossom. Start your upkeep, you lose a life, and you get a fairy rogue now in this case. And the fairy rogue's important because of this card right here, Notorious Throng. For 5 and a blue, we can play this card for its prowl cost if we've dealt comments to a player this turn with a rogue. We create X 1/1 black fairy rogue creature tokens with flying, where X is the damage dealt to your opponents this turn. If it was paid, if the prowl cost was paid, we take an extra turn. So we can get the rogues a couple ways. We can get it through Bitter Blossom, or we can get it through Black Market Connections on that third ability where you make the 3/2 that has Changeling. But most of the time it's through Bitter Blossom. And most of the time Bitter Blossom is one of our early kind of Enlightened Tutor or, tutor type effects because we know that we're going to need it. And getting the extra 1/1s is just very good every turn. And then, of course, no good token deck is complete without an effect like Anointed Procession. We're not in green, so we don't get Doubling Season. We don't get Parallel Lives. We get Anointed Procession. I've gone back and forth on Divine Visitation in this deck, which is the enchantment that turns all your tokens into 4/4 angels. I've gone back and forth on it, and the only reason it's not in here is because I actually find better luck with calling Kindred Discovery for fairies and using the fairies most of the time, rather than forcing myself only into angels that way. But I think if you want to go that route, do it. I don't see any downside to it, to be 100% honest. I think it's a great enchantment and it puts out a lot of value. But for me, it was just, I never could make it feel right. I don't know. It never played well for me, and that's okay. The mana base in this deck, to be honest, has changed a ton. Of course, I'm trying out currently a Darkheart Waste and Caves of Koilos at the moment, just to see if they help out at all. To be honest, I never really used the Pain lands, and so it was hard to judge them, but I'm going to try them. Plaza of Heroes is a cool time. We're playing Mana Confluence, City of Brass. We are not in green, so our ramp's going to be a little bit tough. We're going to rely on card draw, so we want all of our lands to do something for us, and quicker if we can. We are playing the 3 artifact lands we can: Vault of Whispers, Seed of Synod, and the white one is Ancient Den, because they all 3 factor into Nettle Cyst, All That Glitters, and Michiko's. So they're really important. Same thing with Treasure Vault. It is an artifact land, so at the end of the day, it will count for all 3 of those cards as well. It's just a way for us to add up to that artifact count just a little bit and allow us to keep that baby going. Of course, if Urza's Saga is still on the battlefield and hasn't sacrificed itself yet, it would also count. More often than not, Urza's Saga is played very early and used to wrap us into the future. Friends, that's my Alela list. I'm going to put it down in the comments. Like I said, this is one of my favorite decks that I'm currently testing, and it's a ton of fun to play. And this is one of those decks that drives me to keep playing, keep me to want to re-innovate it more and more, find those cards that can fit. You see my sideboard here. You know, I've tried so many different things, and it's cool when you see cards like Zur just come in and do exactly what I want in a slot. I think Zur's a great commander in its own right, both of them. But Alela's just always interested me, and so I wanted to try my best to get them into my list. But guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Friends, I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, link's going to be in the description. Let me know if you have any recommendations. I would love to still hear an outsider perspective. I always think it's good. It helps you brew better decks. It helps you think about different strategies. It's easy to get tunnel vision when you brew and not sometimes get the cards that you need to get. Please like and subscribe. If you have any recommendations for decks you'd like to see me brew, believe me, man, that train is rolling, and I'd love to hear any recommendations you have. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you next time.